Welcome to At the Gate, a podcast where we talk about issues that relate to the Christian life and we try and make practical application about those things. I'm here, Pastor Eric Clark, and I'm here with
Pastor Jason.
We're going to begin a 4-part series on communication, which will deal with how we talk to one another, how we deal with conflict, which is always a large part of any relationship, and how the Bible addresses those things and helps us to live and to love more like Jesus. So we can jump right in by talking about how did we come up with 4 different pitfalls in conflict.
Well, these are from the Gottman Institute, and it's an institute that's been studying relationships and families and marriage for, I think, over 50 years.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It's not a Christian organization, but the conclusions they come up with, when they put them out, we go, wow, that's a very biblical thing to say. Imagine that. The Bible is right. And you finally came to those conclusions, and it's lining up with what God says about relationships. So we look at it and go, wow, these are very good practical things to put into practice, and you actually find them in the Bible as well. So,
yeah, we're so grateful that people come up with solutions, and then we look at Scripture and we say, well, God came up with that solution quite a while ago, but it's been articulated in such a way that people can relate to it today. And what we are going to do is take a look at these 4 pitfalls in conflict that people have and show you just how they are biblical by giving you references and citing Scripture that allows us to move forward in healthy conflict, because conflict's not a matter of if in any relationship, it's a matter of when.
Yep.
And it's not whether you're going to have conflict or not, it's going to be how well you honor one another, how well you respect one another within that conflict.
Yep.
And as we start talking about how a conflict begins between people, could be in various ways, but the first kind of reaction or response, and maybe that's a good place to start. We want to make sure we have a reaction versus a response. And from your perspective, what's the difference between those 2 words? I mean, they're used interchangeably, but we actually use them in a technical sense within our counseling.
So we would say a reaction is kind of a gut reaction. Someone says something that feels critical to you, then you feel hurt. Immediately you throw your defenses up, and so you react out of unthought through words and thought through actions. So we would say, rather than a reaction, we want to prepare ourselves for a response, because you know it's coming. You can if you're in a relationship, if you're in a marriage, if you're in any type of relationship, really, there's going to be a moment when the other person does something that offends you. Mm-hmm. So having a prepared response is being very prudent and going, okay, I know this is going to happen, so how am I going to respond, rather than just react out of emotion or react out of the hurt. So if somebody says something critical, rather than reacting and hitting them back, or then my response would be, okay, I'm going to ask a clarifying question to see what's behind this, to see, did you really mean it that way? So give them the benefit of the doubt, believe the best about them. Just a few nights ago, a really good friend of mine said something and it hit me wrong. And I sat there and I noticed myself shut down. And as I thought through it that night, I go, I love my friend. I know he loves me. I know he didn't mean it that way. So if I'm not able to get over it, then I need to go address it with him and say, hey, when you said this, it hurt me. It's probably more about me than what you did, but I just need to get it. But I've been able to let it go over this, the last couple of days. So it's like, do you know what? I'm just going to forgive that moment. I'm going to move past it. And so it's believing the best about the person. So that was a response that I had stored up, ready to use for when it does happen.
And what an excellent thing to differentiate between those two, because your response, you can't prepare for any individual conflict, but you can prepare in principle for all conflicts.
Yes.
And to have a prepared heart and a prepared mind it allows us to take that moment. So James 1:19, my brothers, take note of this. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. So one principle right off top, take a moment. A reaction is immediate. A response is willing to take a moment to think and to process, just like you did with your friend. And I think that's phenomenal. We'll find that every aspect of these 4 pitfalls, I believe the pitfall is a reaction.
Yep.
The biblical response is something that we're prepared to give. So we should probably talk about what's the first thing that happens when a conflict is going sideways.
Yeah, so usually the first, it's called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for communication. So the first horseman that we want to stay away from is criticism. A lot of the times we view how someone did something or how someone interacted with us or how they're living their life, and maybe we have what we would feel is good motives behind it, but it comes out as critical. It comes out as attacking. It comes out as you're not as good as how I would do it, or you're not. And so this criticism, we got to be careful how we word things when we correct people, so it doesn't come out as something nasty or judgmental. But sometimes someone could be as nice as they can with their wording, and still it feels like a criticism to them. So we have to guard our hearts on both sides on how we do that.
Yeah. My favorite example about a criticism, the reaction versus giving a complaint. So a criticism is an attack on character. A complaint is the description of a behavior. And my favorite example is just my go-to because I experienced this so many times early in my marriage. And my wife did it in a very positive way. So many of us typically leave our clothes on the floor because we're going to jump in those same clothes the next day. Sorry if that offends you. That wasn't, it's not an intent. But that happens very often. And a spouse can come by and say, "You are such a slob."
Yep.
And that's an attack on everything that I am, not just on this one thing, versus saying, "Hey, sometimes I find myself tripping over your clothes. Could you not leave your clothes on the floor?" That's a complaint.
Yep.
Rather than an attack on your character, it's the description of a behavior that is causing friction between you. When we talk about lodging a complaint, I think one of the great things they talk about is what's the attitude you start with. And in Ephesians 4:31, Paul tells the Ephesian church, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. So what is my motivation? What is my attitude? Where is my heart when I first lodge that complaint? And we talk about things like soft startup. Can you describe soft startup for a moment?
Having a gentle startup with someone rather than just jumping right into the punch, that you want. So looking at your motives, what are my motives? Are my motives to make them feel bad or to shame them or to guilt them into right behavior? That shouldn't be the motive. The motive is I love you and I want our relationship to be in right standing. There's something that you're doing that's bugging me. So if my wife were doing something, so my wife, I'm going to throw her under the bus. Honey, I love you. She
I love you too, if that helps.
She is an overcommitter. She loves saying yes to things. She loves helping people. She loves being there to help save the day for people. And that's part of her how God made her. But oftentimes she can overdo it. So rather than me coming up to her and saying, "Look, you've scheduled something again," and getting nasty with her, gentle startup would be, "Honey, you have such a loving heart, and I appreciate how God has made you to want to help people. But I'm feeling a little overcommitted right now. I feel like we need to protect our Friday and our Saturday this week and not, So the gentle startup is affirm the person in how God has blessed them and who they are, but then bring up the behavior. Of okay, this is kind of getting in the way of us, or this feels not right as something that we should be doing right now. So affirm them first, and then bring up the complaint. That would be a gentle startup.
That would apply not only to marriages but to any relationship, even with kiddos or at work. There are times when we have to address issues at work, and we want to start off by affirming, "Hey, we think the world of you. We believe in you. Here's an area where there seems to be a challenge in your life, and we've had to address it several times. Can you help us figure out how we're going to address this issue?
Sure.
It affirms who they are, and then to come back at the end of it and say, and I know we can accomplish this together. I have every bit of faith in you that this can work out. Allows them to say, oh, I'm valued, I'm loved, I'm respected. Here's an issue that needs to be dealt with, and they believe that I'm capable of doing it. That means a lot to people. It takes longer, and it's harder, and it takes more thought.
Yeah.
Very often when I'm lodging a complaint with my wife rather than a criticisms seem to be easy.
Yeah.
You made me mad. Oh, that doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm angry. I don't know what I did wrong. Just telling me I made you mad is really a very ineffective way of lodging a complaint. It's truly a criticism. You are the source of my angst and my anger. So
and it often feels like with a criticism that you're on this side of the issue, I'm on the other. And so but with a gentle startup and a complaint, it's here's the issue. We're both standing on the same side of it, attacking the issue, not attacking each other.
yeah.
So that helps to feel like, okay, you're for me. Even though there's an issue, you're for me in this. So that's where a complaint versus a criticism helps.
And that resolving this will make things better for us, not just me. It's not me getting my way. It's us having a better relationship. But sometimes people don't react well to that.
No.
So the brings up a second. These all kind of stair step on each other, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
And you can choose to walk up the stairs or down the stairs, escalate or de-escalate with each step.
Yep.
So somebody lodges. They can even lodge a complaint in a good way, but we can still react poorly.
Yes.
What does that look like?
So the next step would be choosing to, okay, let's do this. Let's not take personal offense to this, but let's move forward and attacking the issue. Or we could get angry and start to build contempt in our heart toward the other person because of the complaint or criticism that they brought up to us. And when you have contempt growing in your heart, things that come out of you are disrespect, mocking, sarcasm, ridicule. Oh, I guess I'm not good enough for you. And, all these defensive type mechanisms that are coming from a place inside of you that are I'm not believing that you believe in me. I'm not believing that you have my best interest in heart. And I'm possibly reading into your motive of why you're bringing this up in the first place, and you're just this, and you turn it on the other person, and you start to build a level of disrespect in your heart for them.
Yeah, I think the phrase that Gottman used to coin it was defensiveness. That we put up a wall automatically, and I'm refusing to take responsibility for it. Versus a response, which would be acceptance. The hard part with acceptance and the difficult thing for us is that this whole defensiveness, acceptance, contempt, whatever we want to call them, we tend to think all or nothing in our conflicts. I'm right, you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. And yet acceptance says, accept my part. Don't accept that, which isn't true, because I don't know about you, but there's been numerous times I've been in conflicts with my wife, and we're going head to head rather than solving the issue. And part of it is that if I admit I'm wrong in any part of it, I'm automatically admitting I'm completely wrong in the conflict. And there's been times when my wife has says, just can't you admit you're wrong? And I said, and I find myself just all balled up because there's a part of me that's saying I'm not completely wrong, but I can't articulate it. And finding more time to say, all right, where am I wrong?
Yeah.
And where am I not willing to sacrifice my integrity? So you've heard me tell us numerous stories where my wife and I would have a conflict, and one in particular, she goes, "Are you ready to apologize?" And I said, "No, I don't think I am." She goes, "Oh, really?" And what was nice about it, it wasn't a major blow up, because she goes, "Huh." And then we waited, and she actually had to go to work, and I had time to think and pray about it. And I took time to sort out the issue and said, you know what? Here's where I was wrong. Here's where I wasn't wrong. And if I can articulate that to her, it might make a difference. And I simply said, when we got back together, I said, do you have time to talk? She goes, yes. I said, I'd like to talk about that issue that we're in disagreement about. She goes, well, it's about time. I said, yeah, it is. It took me a little while to sort it out in my head. And sometimes we think, again, the reaction side, I have to solve it immediately and it has to be completely resolved. Whereas, being slow to speak, that James passage all over again.
Yep.
I said, I didn't use enough words. I apologize for not being clear in my communication. And she goes, thank you. I said, but I also want to ask you a question. I didn't use enough words, but I didn't necessarily use bad words. It seemed like, to me, maybe you were assuming my motivation and intent, and I just wanted to ask, were you assuming the best of me in that moment or something less than the best? And I appreciate how godly is. She goes, yeah, I was assuming you were being a jerk, but your words are actually pretty neutral. So what we ended up doing is each owning the part of it, and that was the hard part of the acceptance issue. How do you sometimes deal with that all or nothing dichotomy? Because it seems to be true amongst humans and very often true amongst the lovely ladies in our lives, all or nothing.
Yeah. Just in any relationship, we are really good at justifying our behaviors based on what we received from the other person. So we can often have a very hyper-focused view and infatuation with what the other person has done to hurt us. And we start to be completely blind to how we are responding to that because it's, oh, well, she did this, therefore I'm justified in returning with negative behavior. So what I try to do and what I try to get couples to do when they come to me for help is I'll say, okay, you've focused on the behaviors of the other person for far too long.
Yeah.
It's time to sit and to pray and to ask God, what is my part in this? What do I need to own? And so it's amazing when you can start off, especially meeting with a couple and say, all right, you've got a chance to pray, you got a chance to think, what is your part? No justifications. Not justifying, well, I did this, but it was because they did. No, stop that. What was sin in your life? What is the part that you played regardless of what the other person did? And it's funny when they start to confess that and ask for forgiveness, then it drops these defenses in the other person. And then they're able to go, yeah, you know what? These were my part. And then all of a sudden we're forgiving each other and we're confessing and we're moving through the issue together because we're willing to own our part. And then the next step would be, okay, is anything unaddressed? Then you allow the other person to speak in and say, okay, well, there's one other thing that hurt me that you didn't bring up. And, and sometimes it's eye-opening and it's like, wow, yeah, you know what? I did do that. I'm sorry. And sometimes it's like you said, well, you know what? That's not true. That wasn't my intention. That wasn't something I did. That was something you perceived. And so you're able to talk through those issues. And that happens in my own marriage. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of intentionality. It takes a lot of willingness to do some self-reflection and not to make excuses for bad behavior. And
if we don't take on that attitude, it can have effects literally for the rest of our lives. I was working with a couple years ago, and they had both had previous marriages. Both marriages had ended in biblical ways, and they were now looking to get married to one another. And one of the things I'll often do with couples in that situation, I'll say, so your first marriage ended. What could you have done better in that first marriage? And the interesting thing is that very often there's a lot of hurt and maybe not a full amount of healing at that point. And this one particular lady in this thing said, I didn't do anything wrong in our marriage. It was all him. I said, that's fair. The assignment is to go home and just take some time, and I'll tell you what, why don't you go home, pray about it, have a pad in front of you, and if there's nothing, there's nothing. We'll talk about it next week. But if there's something that you could have done, just write it down. And I asked each of the members of the couple to do that. And the next time we got together, she goes, that was an amazing exercise. I said, why is that? She goes, I sat down, I said, there's nothing wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. And I prayed, is there something I could have done better? And she goes, well, I could have done this one thing better. So she wrote down one thing, and then the floodgates opened.
Oh, wow.
And she ended up with I only asked for a list of up to 10, and then she gave me like 20. And it wasn't that she was an evil or horrible person, but she was so caught in, I can't be wrong in this divorce, that she was really struggling and denying that she had done anything wrong. By articulating those and understanding them, she now has a better tendency not to engage in those same things in her next marriage. Yep. So when we, in any relationship, having a disagreement with a friend, when we own our parts, when one person owns, if one person owns, the other person's more likely to reciprocate. Yep. If there's a softening on either side, it's not a guarantee, but it's definitely more likely to happen. Yep. So that acceptance factor is huge in bringing peace to relationships and leaving, as you said, no details unresolved. Is there anything else? And that's it becomes a conversation rather than a fight. Yeah. We've seen, criticism versus complaint. We've seen defensiveness versus acceptance, and each of those up or down. And you can lodge a criticism with me, and I can respond and choose to see past your criticism, or to ask a question that says, so what is it that I did wrong? I made you mad. What did I do? So I'm helping you to lodge a complaint rather than offer a criticism. I can then become defensive or accept it. So it can go both ways at any stage, and they build up or build down. There are other potential conflicts that come. So I launch a criticism. I go into defensiveness. Now I have a third set of choices, don't I? When you look at those, what would be some of those other choices? Well,
the choice would be to just build a culture of contempt within your relationship, where you just automatically assume the worst about that other person. And when you do that, you start to build up a hardness around your heart toward that person. And when you need to address something with that person, rather than actually confronting and moving through it with each other, you can actually choose to stonewall the other person. And as soon as it starts to get hard, or as soon as you start to feel under attack, you just shut down. And it either turns into volatile, nasty words and just trying to control the situation, or it's I'm not going to talk about this, I'm leaving. Whether it's actual physically leaving or emotionally just shutting down and taking it, but you're just not moving forward with the person.
So that cutoff comes as a result of having contempt for the other person. So I get defensive. You're still trying to work with me, and then I just hold you in contempt, and I start putting you down, put down comments. Yep. Well, you're always like this, or that's really your problem, and not. So I'm elevating myself at your expense, rather than the biblical response of building the other person up. To use the Christianese word, we talk about edification, which comes from a word that means literally to build up. Yep. And so we have these ways that we put people down and ways that we build them up. How would you distinguish between those two in terms of techniques?
Yeah, your word choice is going to help that. So taking time to, like the Bible says, take every thought captive, and going, okay, here's the words that are about to come out of my mouth. Are they going to build this person up? Or are they going to tear this person down? And what's my motive right now? Is it to win the argument? Is it to make them feel guilty and shameful? Or is it for me to attack the problem and help this person to know, hey, I believe in you, but we have an issue we got to work through. So
that brings up probably an interesting side note, and that the studies that are out there seem to indicate that within any relationship, and especially in marriages, about 1/3 of your conflict will never be resolved. Yeah. You will not come to a mutual conclusion on that. And some of it's just the way we're built. You and I are built in different ways. So there will always be a tension between us around time. And you are it's not that you don't acknowledge time exists or that you can't keep schedules.
But I do like time travel.
Yes, you do.
So I do like time.
That's right. So, well, let's go back to the future then. You are a highly relational person, and I admire that about you. But in being so relational, there are times when your time starts getting squeezed because you want to spend time talking with the other person and you have something else coming up. So there are times when we're relationally involved and we become late to the next thing. And then there are those of us that are us being me, that I'm pretty time oriented, and so sometimes I can be perceived as being curt or short or even rude in cutting off a conversation because I've got to get to my next thing. So there's upsides and downsides to both. On your side, you're building these relationships. It's fantastic, but sometimes at the expense of a different relationship.
Yep.
I, on the other hand, am so focused on the future relationship that I do it at the expense of the present relationship.
Yep.
And somewhere in there is an art form that no one seems to have mastered. But as a result, you and I have learned to respect and honor those differences almost all the time.
Yeah.
There's times when I find myself holding contempt. He's late again. And then you come in and say, hey, I was meeting with so-and-so, and we had this amazing breakthrough. I'm like, shoot.
Yeah.
It was good that he did that. I don't have to admit that, do I?
Yeah.
So that concept that not every problem has to be solved, but rather coming to an agreement that we're going to honor and respect our differences. And how do we do that? My wife, relational person, not a time-oriented person. We had issues because in ministry, as you know, we're moving from event to event very often. And I had to, it took years, sadly, because this was early in ministry, to be able to express to her, I actually need to be on time to church. She goes, what's the big deal? And I couldn't figure out how was I going to explain that to her. And finally it occurred to me to say, so are you ever late to work? She goes, no, I have to get to work on time. Otherwise I'm going to get in trouble. I'm not going to give good patient care. I'm not going to get my responsibilities done. I said, do you remember that church is my work? She goes, oh, yeah, yeah, sorry about that. And she began to honor me from that moment forward. But in order to do so, she goes, okay, but we both know I'm a terrible manager of time. I said, I'm not going to say that out loud, but thank you for saying that. And I said, how can I help you? She goes, can you give me a 10-minute warning when we need to be walking out the door? That would help me a lot. Just give me a time and then give me a warning because I tend to forget. I get caught up in other things. I said, that's fair. So I did. I gave her a 10-minute warning, and that worked for a couple, 3 weeks, and then she was late again. I said, what happened? She goes, can I ask for a 5-minute warning as well because I forgot? I said, yes.
Is that a 5-minute warning to the 10-minute warning? So 15 minutes?
But again, because she was now willing to honor me because I'd communicated in a way that wasn't a criticism, you're late, you're undisciplined, you're just a bad person versus here's a need, could you help me? Would you honor me by meeting this?
Yeah.
And she, of course, has done that, and I've been very grateful. We actually had a big conflict over going to church together because I said, so what are we going to do about this? You're having a harder time. She goes, all right, we can go separately. That's good because if I went to visit the hospital, we'd go separately. Yeah. So we found ways to honor and respect each other without necessarily resolving that difference that we have.
Yeah, Heather and I, in the area of finances, realizing that we have different priorities with where we think money should go, and I think that's probably a big one that most couples deal with. So I would make the budget and go, sweet, this is it. All right, here's the budget, honey. Adhere to that, type of thing. Yeah. And she's like, there's, it's August and we need to get new shoes for the kids and clothes for school, and so she's bringing up all these other priorities, and I'm going, well, go to the, go get some hand-me-downs, get me. And so I had to learn to see, oh yeah, there are other priorities that aren't necessarily on my list or higher on my list. But because I love my wife and she has priorities, we have to learn to honor each other's priorities. And so I'd pull money out of the fix the Jeep fund and put it into take care of your kids fund. And it's not always that crazy, but learning that I love this person, they matter to me, their priority is on the bottom of my list, but it's on the top of their list. So in order for me to honor them, how can I move a little bit to make sure that's a priority in my life as well? Yep.
And that way, when we're saying we have different priorities, but I'm going to honor yours, means that we've moved out of that culture of contempt and into a culture of building one another up. This is important to you. If it's important to you, it's important to me. Yep. You already kind of mentioned the last and probably the most difficult, because if I receive a criticism, become defensive, and then we enter into contempt. You mentioned already stonewalling, that I'm just done.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little about the two sides of stonewalling, if you don't mind. That's a reaction that says I'm out of here, versus a biblical response to that.
Yeah, and it's something that's happening on the inside of you to say, I shut down, I'm done. But it can also come out in physically. I remember early in our marriage, Heather brought up a criticism, and I just stormed out, jumped in my truck, and left. Didn't say a word to her. And so she is a newly married woman sitting there going, my husband just left. Is he coming back?
Yeah.
Are we, all these things, and going through her minds and these fears. And so I had to learn to say, and this is actually probably in our next one where we talk about, styles of conflict, but when it gets hot, and I need a break, because I know that I can turn into a lawyer. I can use nasty words. I can win the argument through bad means. So I need to take a break. So what I was doing is I was like, hey, you know what? I wasn't stonewalling. What I was doing is I need to take a break, but it seemed like stonewalling to her. So I had to learn to say, honey, I need a break. We'll come back and hit this in 30 minutes when I go and I get a chance to calm down and pray and not allow this eruption of filth that wants to come out of my mouth and hurt you to subside. So, but a lot of times we don't articulate that. So whether we're stonewalling or not, it can be perceived as, he doesn't even care.
Yeah.
He's out. He doesn't care. He doesn't care enough to deal with this issue with me. He doesn't care enough about me. He doesn't. And then when you feel that way, then you're like, well, fine. I don't care either. So then boom, stonewall. So anytime that the conversation gets a little heated, both of you shut down and say, well, and as soon as you start stonewalling each other and not engaging each other, that's a recipe for divorce.
Yeah, and if that becomes habitual and a culture of the relationship, it's very hard to come back from that.
Yeah.
You're kind of talking about the idea of I'm so emotionally overwhelmed that I've just got to put up a wall between us, and I think we often call that being flooded. You're so flooded with emotion, you're going to either explode or you're going to leave.
Yep.
And that describes the stonewalling. The biblical antidote to that is to get centered, to get center yourself on Christ and in prayer, to take time to get soothed, and to make sure that your heart is right around that other person. And so you describe a behavior that can be good or bad, getting some time away to settle down, not to just sit there and seethe and come back ready to explode, but rather to settle down, to be able to move back through the positive steps of conflict is incredibly important. And when most couples don't realize that they are flooded. Yeah. The folks in Washington, the Gottman crew, they do a great job. They'll sit a couple down in a room together, and then they're hooked up to machinery. They take their pulses and their blood pressures, they measure their heart rates, and what they have discovered is that people most of the time don't know they're flooded. They don't even feel themselves tensing up their muscles and their fists, and then that becomes perceived as a threat of violence, when in fact well, it could be, it's more likely I'm just getting tense and I'm getting angry and I don't know what to do with it. And I don't even realize I'm there. And so with these folks that they've got all wired up, these alarms start going off at about 100 beats a minute. We've all had that instance where we feel our heart pounding in our ears. And that means you're flooded. Your body has gone into fight or flight mode. Although I had a young lady here at our church goes, yeah, I don't do either one of those. I said, what do you do? She goes, I freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. So you're just dead on the Serengeti.
Run! I can't.
And that requires soothing. That requires getting it, because what they discovered, and it showed it over and over again in the videotapes and in the dialogues that people would have and the transcripts, that once you are flooded, once you're over that edge, you no longer hear, see, or think accurately. And that's not an opinion. That's not just, it's just a fact. So they'd have these couples and they'd get into these fights. They'd both get flooded and they'd take a moment. Okay, we're going to take a break. Everybody, they get them all calmed down. Then they said, so what do you think happened there? Well, he said this. And the guy goes, I never said that. She goes, yes, you did. You said this. And then you shook your fist at me. He goes, no, I didn't do that. And they said, well, let's take a look at the
videotapes.
Which would be awful if we had all of our conversations videotaped, because the amount of times I'd be wrong, I don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
And they would show that indeed he had balled up his fist, but he never made a threatening gesture. He was just flooded, and so he had balled up his fists, trying to hold it together. And then it turns out that neither one of them had heard either what they had said or what had been said to them accurately. I never said that. Yes, you did. Well, it turns out you said something like that. Mm-hmm. No way. Look at this. Oh, I guess I did. But you didn't say what the other person actually heard. Mm-hmm. So our seeing goes wrong, our hearing goes wrong, and our thinking goes wrong. We are flooded. Mm-hmm. And I try and work with couples and tell them it's okay to take a time out. Yep. But here's the downside of taking a time out. The downside of taking a time out is the other person says, you turned and walked away from me. You got in the car and you drove away. Yep. I'm abandoned. Yep. Now I'm flooded. Versus saying, you know what? I'm flooded. I need a break. Yep. So calling time out is a legitimate thing. But what you do is you set a culture in your relationship saying, when I call time out, that means we're going to come back in 30 minutes and check in with each other. Yep. It's not time out, I'm out of here, I won't have anything to do with you ever again. So couples making that agreement, time out means we're coming back, and in a half hour I come back and I check with you and you say, no, I'm still flooded. Yep. All right, another half hour. Yep. But you don't let the issue go. And that's why I think Ephesians 4 tells us to not let the sun go down on our anger. Yeah. And that means that an issue, by the way, just clarifying, it is not a literal sundown. Otherwise, that means we can't have conflict after sundown.
That's right.
It means don't let those issues go unaddressed. Yep. Don't let the sun go down on it. Keep it in the light. And even if it means agreeing to disagree, and still honoring and respecting one another, at least you've dealt with the issue, rather than letting it getting built up and creating bitterness, and then that stonewalling becomes permanent and you're out of relationship all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I think the idea of us getting flooded, we can go, oh, there's something wrong with me. No, there's not something wrong with you. That's how God made you, to be able to handle stress, to run away from a lion or get somewhere safe. So when we think, oh man, I'm getting flooded again, I'm losing, that's okay. Just acknowledge it and say, all right, you know what, I need to go do something to calm myself down from this, because this is a natural response that happens in my body. My blood is flowing away from my brain into my extremities, and I'm not going to be able to, like you said, think well, address well. Therefore, let's take a break. So it's not something wrong with you. It's something that we just acknowledge about how our makeup is, how God made us.
Yeah. Not that we would always be ready to do this, but if it ever works out. So flooding expresses itself in tension. Our lips compress. Sometimes you see people, and we know somebody's about to explode because their lips have gotten all together. They've gotten white. They're so pressed together. Yeah. And our pupils contract. Wow. And it is a legitimate thing to take a moment. And so let's say I'm thinking you're flooded. I'm watching your pupils. I'm watching your lips. I'm watching your body. And just say, so can I ask you a question? And when you're going to ask that question softly, so again, soft startup. Yep. Are you flooded? Are you feeling emotionally overwhelmed right now? Because if you're not, well, go ahead. But if you are, now, often when a person's flooded, it has to be short. Mm-hmm. Are you okay? Yeah. Now, breathe. Yeah. Those sorts of things are important. So recognizing that and being able to not accuse, you're flooded, but rather, are you flooded? Are you doing okay? Are we all right? Yeah, I'm pretty tense right now. Do you want to take some time? That's fair. Yep. So not abandoning me. We're going to come back to it, but it's all right to soothe. Mm-hmm.
And these are skills that we've been given to handle conflict. Yep. And so the next step is, are we going to put them into use? Or are we going to go and just continue the behaviors that have led to the outcomes that we don't want? Or are we going to be willing to try something new? And part of that is taking every thought captive. Well, here's what my flesh wants to do. Nope, what have I learned? I need to do this instead. And it's a choice. And so I don't know how many times I've counseled others and given them the steps to do so they can have healthy conflict, yet they still keep falling back into the old ways of behavior. They don't grab a hold of that sin and do away with it and practice the new stuff. And they never move forward. And so we've been given these to overcome if we trust God and trust that these are the biblical examples. But it's our choice.
Yep. The Ephesians 4:29. Ephesians 4 is great about relationships just in general. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, so no criticism, but only what is helpful for building each other up. Mm-hmm. So there's our edification, that it may benefit those who listen according to their needs. That is something that is incumbent upon each one of us. We need to take responsibility. It's not upon the other person. Any one person can stop the cycle. Any one person can choose to react in a positive way, respond in a positive way, rather than react in a negative way. And so we need to take our responsibility for ourselves, not for the other person. And is there anything you would encourage people to do as we kind of wrap up these 4 pitfalls or horsemen?
Well, I think as we look at these 4 things, identify them in your communication style. And if you're seeing all 4 of these things, then just pick one to start to work on in this next week or something. But it can be overwhelming when you look at all 4 of these things: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, stonewalling, and you see all 4 of them, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this wrong. Just start to pick one to work on, and be consistent with it. Because you might start to work and go, hey, I did a gentle startup and she still got mad, or he still got mad. That's okay. You're doing the right thing. Continue to do the right thing, and you will reap a harvest of righteousness as you practice righteousness.
Very good. Well, I hope this all helps you to love more like Jesus. We look forward to seeing you again soon. I'm Pastor Eric Clark.
I'm Pastor Jason.
God bless.